In the dark there's gold. I'm on my knees, I'm cold. I can feel it though.
I just decided that I wanted to spend this year watching sunrise every day. A little anchor point in my day where I began the day in beauty. Whatever else happened in my life, whatever else happened in the world, I was going to be here showing up, watching the sunrise.
I can feel it though. In the dark there's gold.
Not only is it an issue that is really close to my heart, having lost people to suicide, friends and family, but it feels like the sunrise is a bit of a metaphor for the light returning. That however dark the night, just getting through the night. The night is often the hardest time if somebody is feeling depressed. It's the time when someone can feel the loneliest, the hardest to reach out. The rest of the world is sleeping, the rest of the world is further away. The night is often when people choose to end their lives. In the darkness, when you're feeling mentally like that darkness is never going to end, and that the only way out is to take yourself out of it through suicide. The rising sun is saying that the light will return, that you can get through the night, you can get through the darkness. Yeah, it's a symbol of hope. It's a symbol of not even just hope, because hope relies on belief in a way that things will get better. But the sunrise is an actual fact, it's a reality, it's going to happen. Things will get better, things will change in some way to make circumstances different, to make circumstances brighter, to be able to see things differently in ways that you might never expect. Many times when I turn up for the sunrise and I'm thinking, it's going to be grey, why am I getting up? And then suddenly, in ways I never expected, the world is golden, the world is beautiful. There's a song I listened to this year. I just found myself playing it over and over again. And the more I listened to it, the more I made that connection of the rising sun with hope.
I wrote that in the pandemic, that song. And yeah, it is about definitely going through a very, very difficult time. And it's not about starting to feel better. It's about the little bit before that where even though you don't feel better, you know there's a chance you might at some point. And it's about that kind of bit of hope starts to come back, I think. The first sort of glimmer of hope that you feel when you're in those situations. Hopefully it's a positive, sort of uplifting song, but it definitely comes from a very dark time. That's hard sometimes because I think it's kind of such an isolating experience, and the only person who can help you is you, and that's a really hard thing. I'm sort of learning to, when I do feel like that, to kind of accept it as just as valid as feeling happy. There's so much pressure on you, isn't there, you should be happy, you should be doing this, but actually those feelings are just as valid. And from a creative point of view, I always get my sort of most powerful songs come from those times. I don't write songs that I like when I'm happy. I think if you accept the situation, it's less horrible, and just know that you will get better. I saw this interview with Ruby Wax the other day, and she was describing depression, and she said, it's not just feeling sad. You wake up and you're gone, you're not there, and that's what it's like. And as horrible as that is, I'm sort of learning to sit with yourself and know, even though you might not be able to see it, but sometimes you get this feeling that things will get better, and that's definitely what that song's about. Like the sun rising in the dark.
I found it quite shocking how many people I know have been directly affected by suicide. Every single story is a unique tragedy, and also a unique story of resilience and strength of those who survive afterwards. I invited a few people to talk about how suicide impacted their lives.
My brother Nicky took his life at the age of 33. It was so sudden and so unexpected and so shocking. I felt like I wanted to crawl under a rock and die. We had no idea I had my grief, my mum had her grief, my sister had her grief. But we felt so much for our mum because she was a mum who'd lost her child and it nearly destroyed her. So Nick, he was charming, he was handsome, he was creative, but he was also very sensitive, and I think he found life very hard. And to escape from life, he took drugs and eventually became a drug addict. He really found it challenging to be alive. Eventually, in order to get his fix, he did some bad things to our family and he became estranged from the family. Then his partner at the time, they were living together, he would have violent outbursts and she was worried for their son, so she left and he ended it. I think her leaving was just the straw that broke the camel's back, and he ended it very violently. It turned everyone's world upside down, partly because it was so unexpected, but it was so shocking. We went on the emotional roller coaster that is grief, cycling through the emotions of anger, guilt, regret, what ifs, what if I'd been there, what if I'd done this, what if I'd done that. To help us, we went to cruise volunteers, which was very good for my mum and myself and my sister, but my dad refused to go. That wasn't his way of dealing with the world. I had this really strong need to find a sister who'd lost a brother to suicide. This is back in 1991, so there really weren't many resources available at that time to help people who'd been bereaved of suicide or to help people who were in danger. There were a few organisations and I went to one and they helped connect siblings to siblings, and it was really, really useful because I didn't feel anyone could understand my position if they weren't a sister who'd lost a brother to suicide, and we corresponded for a while and it was really helpful. I'm really glad actually to see now that there are so many more resources to help people, help other people who are in that danger of taking their life. And it's great that grassroots suicide prevention is doing what they're doing, and there are other organisations that are helping young people under 15 to 33 with super high suicide rates now. Good on them, and also to the Every Sunrise project for supporting grassroots suicide prevention.
Hi, I'm Rachel, and yeah, here we are, waiting for the sunrise. So my brother committed suicide 21 years ago. It's quite a long time, really, and obviously I wouldn't say that I'm affected by every single moment of the day, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that every day there's a moment of and I do feel that I've addressed it, but equally I wish in hindsight, and perhaps it's not too late, I'd got some support or looked for some support. That doesn't mean there wasn't any, but actually if I reflect on it, I realise I didn't. My dad at the time was very involved in another charity and raised lots of money with them, but I didn't want to do it. And I think I may have mentioned before, one thing that I found tricky is there didn't seem to be any sibling support for older children. At the time I was 30. It would have been nice to have other people of my age to talk to. Every time you speak to your parents about it, they get upset. I only had him, so that it wasn't like I could say, right, I'll go and speak to the other sibling, because there isn't another sibling, there is just me, which in itself is another story of realising you're now the only child, especially as your parents get older, so that's a challenge too. But I think if I was to talk to myself again 21 years ago, I'd say, right, you need to go and speak to charities, to be and just go and talk to people who feel the same as you. All your friends empathise and they may have lost people, but perhaps not in the same raw, shocking way. I think that's what you're left with. It's the shock. Yeah, I'd say I was still left with that shock, actually. Even though he wasn't well, I still thought it's going to be fine. We'll find a fix in the end. We'll work it out. Yeah. Well, it didn't. So yeah, that shock. So I think it would have been good on reflection, to talk to people that would similarly go, yes, absolutely, like you've just said, yes, feel exactly the same, definitely.
Yeah. There's so many different subtleties as well to different people's experience that you want to find somebody with more and more your own.
I mean, as I said, I'm talking about 21 years ago, where there wasn't as much awareness of mental health issues. There wasn't as much support. People are much less accepting of a mental illness than a physical illness. If you can see that there's something physically wrong with you, much more empathy. Then things have moved on significantly
Massively,
from then. The thought that there is now an app that someone who, either the person who's in crisis or a friend of the person or family, whatever, could just pick up and start using is really reassuring. At your worst, the last thing you want to do is actually talk to another human, to be honest. You know, if you really can't even get out of bed, don't want to eat, etc., etc., last thing you want is to, oh, come on, we're going to go and talk to a counsellor now. It's just not going to happen. So maybe interacting with your phone with someone who might not even feel as if they're a real person, but gives you answers that maybe, or
just puts a different suggestion into your head or a different bit of information that might just touch you in that moment, change a thought.
Exactly.
process.
I'd like to think there are points at which, okay, we've gone this far, interact with something, or actually I'm going to step back. I'd like to think that was possible. Why does it have to be inevitable? It doesn't. So having something that could maybe reduce that inevitability is a fantastic idea.
As you were saying, the person isn't necessarily wanting to reach out or knowing when to reach out when they're feeling like that. And that's a big problem, is how do you intercept the thought process when the person is being very private with that. That's going to be a challenge even with awareness, but the more awareness there is, those people are going to be more aware that there is help out there. We're dedicating this perfect sunrise to Adi, who would be 50 today. I think the culture still needs to change so much with the way that we bring up boys and the way that we teach young men. I think that's changing with social media, that young boys are seeing more men being open and vulnerable about their feelings. That's a really good thing. But I think there's still such a pressure in society to be strong, hard, tough, and that doesn't benefit anybody. I think the stigma about male vulnerability has a lot to do with the high incidence of suicide amongst men. We really need to popularise the idea that being open, vulnerable and asking for help when you need it is strength. Because if you don't do that and you're just faking this fake strength that you think society needs to see from you, it increases the mental health risks. If any of us wear a mask of strength, then we're more likely to interpret asking for help as failure.
Good morning, my name is Claire. I'm at a place called Broxhead Common in Hampshire. It is about 6 o'clock, the sun is just coming up. I thought I'd come up here because I run up here quite often and it's beautiful because all the heather's out. So I wanted to talk today about suicide. I'm a survivor of suicide in that I lost my dad 2 months before my 6th birthday. He'd been saying for a while, he'd been quite depressed and he'd been saying that we'd all be better off without him. That just wasn't the case, because when he died, everything just fell apart. We lost our house because it came with his job. We had to move to the other end of the country where nobody knew us. When you lose someone to suicide, it's as though you've been in the middle of a huge row with them and they just walked out and slammed the door, and you can't ever make up with them. You can't ever resolve what's happened. You're just left with just question after question after question. You're left with all the what ifs. It's not just the guilt of whether you could have saved them, although you do have that. But say, for example, they'd been murdered. You could be really angry with the person that had murdered them, but the person that's killed them is themselves. So you're really angry with them for that. But you're also so traumatised by what they've done to themselves. You know, how they've died. Suicide is often pretty brutal. Both the people I lost was hanging. And it's a horrible way to die. For a long time I was kind of obsessed with the details of how my brother in particular had died. How long did it take? And I don't know, it was just, really difficult. One of the things that my mum told me when I was quite little was she was there when my dad died. He died in front of her, and she told us in minute detail what happened, all the graphic details of it, which when you're kind of 7 years old is quite hard to hear. You're left with abandonment issues because, my dad was really close to me. We got on really well. We had a really lovely relationship. So for him to just get up and leave like that and never come back and never tell me why, that meant for years and years, if I had an argument with anyone, I just would think that's it. If I was in a relationship and we had an argument, it could be the tiniest thing, I would think, well, that's it, then it's over, And that's really hard. It's hard on your relationships, it's hard on you, hard on the people around you. The repercussions just go on and on and on for the rest of your life. They don't leave you. It's not like you're just left with the emptiness of having lost someone. You're just left with the questions and the self-doubt and everything that comes with it. It's hugely complicated, and that's why we really need to talk about it. And when I lost my dad, it was 1977, so there was no such thing as counselling. As a kid, you were just supposed to get on with it. You can imagine that's quite hard when you're that age. I understood what had happened. It wasn't that I didn't understand. I knew that he had killed himself, but I didn't ever get to talk through why he might have done that and why it wasn't my fault. I had one conversation with a teacher, a very nice teacher called Mrs. Hannah, who sat me on her lap, I remember, and she said that when she was little, her dad had been very sad and he'd walked into the sea and never come back. And that was the only conversation that I had with an adult about it. It was the only conversation that shed any light on it for me. And that was really tough, that none of the adults in my family would talk about it. My grandparents wouldn't talk about my dad, full stop. Not about his death, not about things that he did when he was alive. And that negates that person, It's hard. As a kid, it's not very common to have one of your parents be dead. When you meet new children, they often ask you, what do your parents do? And so I'd get asked what my dad did, and I'd have to say that he was dead. Then people want to know why he's dead, what did he die of? And I learned quite quickly that if you say they killed themselves, you get quite a bad reaction to that. It tends to shut down a conversation straight away. You get met with just this sort of horror and this embarrassment, and people just don't know what to do with it. Especially back then. This was in 1977 that he died. It went on like this all the way through my childhood. What tended to happen is sometimes I'd just lie about it because I didn't want to deal with the embarrassment of it and the horror and the thing of just shutting a conversation dead, just like that. So if people said, what does your dad do? I'd say he's in the army, or he's a chef, or he's a spy. I mean, I could say whatever I wanted, really. But inside, I was lying about it. I was denying him, I was denying what had happened, and that was really quite tough. The other thing is that you sometimes have people in the family that can't cope with it either. My grandparents, his parents-in-law, who were very close to him, they just couldn't talk about it at all. And I can remember specifically folding up some clothes with my grandmother, and I was folding a shirt, and my dad had taught me to fold shirts with the arms so that they go across the back, and my grandmother did it just so they went down the side. And I said to her, this is how my dad used to do it, and she just absolutely shut down the conversation again, so I wasn't even allowed to have those memories of him. So it's really tough if you've got family members that can't talk about it either. And it's not even talking about the actual suicide, it was just talking about him, but they couldn't bear it because of what had happened. So if I roll forward 23 years after my dad died, I got a call from my mum one night, and she said, I've got some very sad news. And I thought she was going to tell me that my grandmother had died, and she said that my brother had died, and she said he hung himself. And literally it was like a trapdoor just went open in my life. I was so angry with him because he'd done this to us. He'd been through it himself. He knew how awful it was to be on the receiving end of suicide, and yet here he was putting us through it again. I was 29 at the time. That's quite a young age to not have a sibling. I remember being at a party, and this girl asked me, she was only in her early 20s, and she said, what do your parents do? And so I said that my dad was dead, And she said, "Oh no, how did he die?" So I said, "Suicide." And she was all, horrified at that. And then she tried to move things on by saying, "Did I have any siblings?" So, so I had to say, "I had a brother, but he died." And then she was like, "How did he die?" I said, "Suicide." And she just got up and said she had to go and get another drink, and that was it. And it was kind of funny in a way, but just not as well, because you're in this situation where you just have to keep explaining it to people, and it's just awful. And it's currently the biggest killer of people under 35 in this country, and yet we still can't talk about it. We can talk freely about people dying of cancer, people being hit by cars, or anything else. It's a thing that really needs to change, because the more we can talk about it, the less of a stigma there's going to be. That stigma is still so big, even in this day and age, even when there's been so much publicity about mental health. We still don't talk about suicide. We don't talk about it from the point of view of the people who are feeling suicidal, and we don't talk about it from the point of view of the survivors. And that really, really needs to change. We need to not be afraid to have those conversations, and we need to not be afraid to ask for help or to reach out to people that we think need help. One of the really common things with suicidal people is that once they've made the decision, they will seem to their friends and family as if they've turned a corner, as if everything's going to be okay. And certainly the last conversation I had with my brother, he was quite hopeful about life. He seemed hopeful. He was a graphic designer. He just designed a game that was about to come out. He had all kinds of plans going on, and then a few weeks later, that was it. He was gone. And that's a really common thing. The grassroots suicide prevention charity is doing amazing work. They're trying to, get rid of this stigma attached to suicide. We need to change the conversation. We need to have the conversation. Let's just try and take that stigma away from suicide, make it something that we talk about, because the more we can talk about it, the more people will understand, the more people may be likely to go and seek help before it gets too late. So that's what I wanted to say. So that sun is still coming up. It'll be a beautiful day. And this is for Fran for every sunrise. And that's Claire signing off at Broxhead Common. All right.
In the dark there's gold. I'm on my knees, I'm cold. I can feel it though.
My brother was creative, smart, deep thinking, philosophical. He was a website designer, computer consultant. He was interested in so many different mysteries of the universe, of the world, and would be always discussing them. He had so much going for him in his life. He was really active, really busy. He accepted an invitation just that night to go and speak at a meeting. It was 2009, the financial crash. He was under a lot of financial pressure running his own business. And that night his girlfriend left him too. He was found in the sea the next morning. It was a complete shock to us. Our world just blew apart. It was very public because his face filled the front page of the Portsmouth News, and it was put on the boards outside newsagents around town, so that wherever I was going I saw a board of my brother's face. And I would really like media outlets to give thought to a person's friends and family when they make decisions like that. I was working as a mental health support worker at the time, and even though I was really aware of mental health issues and suicide, I just still never imagined that this would happen within my own family. Like some of the others have spoken about, I really wanted to find the experiences of another sister who had lost a brother to suicide. One of the books that I came across at that time was written by a woman called Donaleen, and just that title really sprung out at me, because that was a question that was really in my mind. In many ways, me and my brother weren't often very close. It's just one of those complex things that there's so many ways that we could have been closer. We could have spent more time together. We had so much in common. We had lots that we didn't have in common. It's that sadness of thinking, did he know how much he did mean to me? Did he know how much I appreciated and loved him? And possibly not, and that is part of my grief. So the title of that book was really an initial connection with my feelings at that time, and it was a very helpful book for me to read. Donaleen is in Canada, but she has sent a message, and she's also really kindly offered her book for free to anyone watching this video.
I don't remember exactly when or how I made the decision to write Did You Know I Would Miss You? But the idea came upon me very soon after my only brother Steve took his life in May of 2004. Losing Steve to suicide was profoundly unsettling for me. I had lost one of the few people I'd known since infancy. I had lost a part of myself linked to a childhood that only he shared. I had struggled with depression at times and knew something of what he must have gone through. That made it easier to understand why he made the choice he made, but didn't prevent it from being the biggest heartbreak of my life. Right away, I looked for a book about the soul journey of the suicide loss survivor. Couldn't find one and decided to write this, not just for myself, but also for other suicide loss survivors torn apart by grief. Writing Did You Know I Would Miss You brought mercy to pain and turmoil. In times of despair, it kept me alive. It compelled me to let my soul take over, to let it spill over into my life and into the lives of others. As well as telling my story, Did You Know I Would Miss You provides opportunities for people who've lost loved ones to suicide to tell their stories. It takes courage to tell our loved one's story, whether it's to a support group of others bereaved by suicide, a gathering of family and friends, a public meeting on suicide prevention, or the private pages of our journals. It takes courage because every time we do it, we face our grief, along with our own and others' fear of death, suicide, mental illness, despair, or whatever else scares us. It is challenging to pay homage to the shadows that are part of every life. But to deny this reality exiles us from our own stories, from our own lives. Our story matters. Our loved one's story matters. Did You Know I Would Miss You helped me transform from Steve's grief-stricken sister to his life-affirming ally in an ongoing connection with a man who has expanded beyond the suffering that informed so much of his life. May it do the same for you.
My brother died 14 years ago, and it's still with me on a very regular basis that I'm thinking of him, that I'm still mulling over questions. Suicide creates a lot of complex feelings because so many things are unresolved and unanswered. Many people, I, can torment myself. The questions of if only or what if, how might I have made things differently? It's a form of self-blame and it's not useful at all. It only adds more pain, but it's very, very difficult to avoid. You know, you go back in hindsight, all the different little experiences that you had where you might have said something differently, or you might have reached out, where you might have noticed something that now is glaring at you that you didn't really think was very important at the time. You just feel, you convince yourself that you could have saved their life. And many people want to say in supporting you that no, there's nothing you could have done. But I think what I actually like, by grassroots suicide prevention's name, it is possible to prevent suicide. It is possible to take actions and say words that can prevent suicide. And that isn't a means of beating yourself up and adding to those feelings of guilt. It's not to say, yes, you could have saved their life. It's just to acknowledge maybe those things that you said or could have done wouldn't have made a difference. But I think the message has got to be, the more that we're aware of things that we can say, the things that we can do when we know that somebody is not quite being themselves, that there is a risk. There is the possibility that we can help people in a real way and recognise the signs of potential risks of suicide. Then maybe more people can change their lives around and can be reached out to and can make different decisions. I think it's really important that we talk about suicide prevention without the attitude of it being a morbid subject, that it's a story of hope, it's a cause of hope. It's like the sun rising every day. It's like the gold coming out of the darkness. People can be saved, people's lives can change around. Anyone can feel in a place of darkness. Any one of us can be pushed to an edge where we feel like we don't want to go on. But any one of us can also turn that around, can know that it is not the only option, and that is a cause to celebrate.
can feel